Oh, hi everyone. Um, Welcome to today's Research America Alliance member webinar. And thank you as always for joining us and for your partnership with Research America. We truly, truly appreciate it. And if your organization is not a partner, let me put in a plug as I always do. We would love to have you join the Alliance. We're much stronger for the many organizations that lend their ideas and basically their sweat and blood for research advocacy. So please do think of joining our Alliance. Without further ado, let me introduce our two expert guest speakers. So Jessica Drislane is the CEO of OpenScholar, and Jaime Rubin is a professor and vice chair for investigator development at Columbia University. They're both going to speak to us in two separate presentations about strategies for securing grant funding. And I'm sure that that's an interesting topic for many in our audience, and for me too, actually. I have never been in the academic world to secure grant funding, so I think this is going to be really fascinating. As usual, please type your questions into the Q&A box. We're going to hold those questions to the end of both presentations. And with that, Jessica, let me turn it over to you to kick things off.
Okay, terrific. Thank you so much. So I'm going to share my screen. And let me just see, can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Present mode. Terrific. Okay, so I'm Jessica Drislane. I'm the CEO of OpenScholar. We are a research software platform that is used by many research institutes around the world. Started at Harvard University 10 years ago. And while running this platform and proliferating it to research institutes and R1 universities, we've noticed some patterns with respect to the success in securing grant funding. So there are some tried and true kind of nuts and bolts of applying for grant funding. And I know that Jaime is going to talk about that in her presentation, the stuff that you absolutely need to do and the process that you need to follow. And that's what I will call the science of the process of obtaining grant funding, the steps you need to take. But there's also some art to this process as well that we've noticed. And we've observed some subtleties over the last few years. And I wanted to share those subtle tactics and strategies that some of our clients and PIs and faculty use to more successfully attain grant funding. And so let me just walk through. As a precursor, the most successful grant recipients that we see, they leverage the visibility of their research, and they also leverage really great storytelling, and they lean on collaboration and also transparency. So best practices, we work with 23,000 scholars and scientists across our platform, and we've seen lots and lots of successful grant recipients. And the trends that we see from talking with these thousands of researchers on our platform and watching what the successful grant recipients do are the following. So oftentimes they tell a really terrific, really persuasive science story. And I'm going to show you a few examples of those. For our younger researchers on the platform in particular, when they connect to and align with more, experienced and more prolific, in many cases, researchers, that helps them to attain funding. And then the last piece of it is this openness and transparency after you attain grant funding, showing your work. That seems to be a best practice, good stewardship around the grant funding that you receive. And I'm going to show you some examples of that too. Oops, let me just go back here. Okay, so what makes a great science story? Telling a great science story is important for getting the attention of your funders, and they read lots and lots of applications. So many of them are highly technical, and they tend to probably blend together. But a clean, clear narrative is compelling, and it can also be sort of somewhat rare. It can stand out. So if your research narrative hangs together tightly on, for example, a lab website, this is it becomes very clear, what you do, how it's different, how more research funding would help you. So you're really telling a story illustratively, graphically, pictorially, and that can be highly persuasive. A compelling science story should be powerful persuasion on its own. And so I'm going to show you some examples of what I think are really great science stories. So this is Peng Yi, and he is a PI at Drislane Diabetes and at Harvard Medical School. And Drislane is obviously diabetes, and Peng studies insulin resistance in pancreatic tumor cells. And that is a pancreatic tumor cell right here. And Peng does a terrific job of pictorially showing how the steps in his process are utilizing the grant funding that he's received to advance his work and his research. And so he uses sort of these bright, beautiful colors, these beautiful, I say beautiful, these are insulin resistant pancreatic tumor cells, but they are quite beautiful. And he uses a lot of artwork in his site. And so it's quite clear, even though what he's doing is extremely complex and it's hard to understand if it's not your specific discipline within the sciences, but he does a terrific job of expressing his enthusiasm, of expressing the steps in his process, and of pictorially showing you the advances that he's making. So I love Peng's site. He actually put the site up by himself without a knowledge of sort of software and coding, because he was just really enthusiastic about wanting to pull in the graphic images that he's been studying under the microscope into his lab site. So he does a terrific job of explaining a complex topic and the steps in the advancement of his research. This is the Sioux Lab, and this is at Northwestern. This is a husband and wife team, and they do work in the area of spinal fusion research. It's Wellington and Aaron Sioux, and they do a lot of interviews. They recruit a lot of young team members, and they are quite public facing in the way that they are attracting talent, and they share that on their lab website. They share a lot of stories about what their team members in their lab are working on, and they update their lab site constantly, so you can see where the research dollars are going. They have a lot of videos on the site, so you can personally kind of tap into the personalities of the people working in their lab. You can feel their enthusiasm. You can hear them telling first-person accounts of the work that they're doing, the research they're doing. And it's updated, as I said, on a regular basis. And so you can see kind of how the grant funding is being used. And what I think they do a terrific job of is to build enthusiasm around the advancements that they're making, which helps to attract more grant funding, because they're making progress and they've got a team of smart young people who are enthusiastically talking about it. And so you get a sense of the culture of this lab on this lab site too, which I really love. So another great lab story is Anna Greca at the Broad Institute. So Anna, I think she does a wonderful job of showing the passion for her research. She works with the Broad Institute is a genomics center here in Boston. And so their PIs are just these amazing people. And Anna is amazing. And she researches rare childhood diseases. And she expresses a lot of what she does through art and imagery. So I'm actually going to escape out of this for one quick second. I'm going to show you Anna's site. This is Anna's lab. So you can see I had just taken some screenshots of it to show you in the presentation. But what is really, really beautiful is, I think, the work that she does. It's focused on, she talks about her current areas of investigation. So before she even is publishing something, she's telling what she's working on right now. So it won't be indexed in a Google search, but she's telling you, here's what we're working on right now. That's what she needs grant funding for. She also really does a great job of showcasing her team. She's the PI, but she's got a terrific team and she's always adding to it. And so she has everyone who works in her lab working, showcased here on her lab site. And then she has obviously her publications she talks about, but then, this is, it shows them in the media and different events that they are hosting and participating in. So, and they update this constantly. And so what I love about this is that she is able to tell this story about what she does. She humanizes it with the artwork on her site. She updates it. She is inclusive with the people that she is showcasing, giving credit to all of her junior investigators. And that again communicates the ethos of her lab. And she communicates what she's working on right now, not just that which has come before in the past and has been funded. So she's constantly reaching out to the community with this lab site. And I think she does a beautiful job with this site. So let me just head back into this deck and head back into present mode. Okay. Just takes 1 second to get back up. All right, so those are some compelling science stories, I think. The other thing I want to talk about is the network and collaboration and how important networking and collaboration can really be. So many studies and analyses show us that collaboration pays when it comes to getting grant funding. So collaboration, not just across disciplines, but we know that cross-disciplinary, multidisciplinary funding gets a lot of attention from the more sort of typical grant making, largest grant making bodies, NIH, NSF. And so that funding continues to increase each year. We see that, we track it. Aligning with more established and senior and prolific researchers also seems to help. We've seen that, but that's also been tracked and studied and cited. So for that reason, within this, we had a lot of younger researchers say to us, they recognize this trend and they wanted to be able to reach out and connect with kind of more seasoned and prolific researchers who've done more because they just have been in the field for longer. So we built this piece of this natural language processing algorithm into our software called Links, and that's a tool that you can use to connect with other researchers. And I'm going to show you what that looks like. But that's just one tool that you could use to ensure that you're networking and you're finding potential collaborators. So I'm going to duck out for one more quick second. I'm going to show you what that looks like here. So this is a gentleman who you might recognize. He's a professor, Steven Pinker at Harvard. This is his website that we created for him. Steve is really terrific at pulling in multimedia, really engaging people. And he's one of the most cited folks, in his field, which is great, gets a lot of funding. This is what I was talking about in that slide, Links. And so when I pull it up, people are now able to search across every OpenScholar site, but there's a lot of things you can do. We have also integrated with ORCID, and we're big supporters of open access and open science for this reason, because our goal really, which is I think your goal, is to foster connections, to help to foster collaboration, to help to get to accelerate outcomes, get to outcomes faster, which benefits all of us. But that involves the step on the way, which is getting grant funding. So anything that we can do to help you to get more grant funding, we've tried to build that in. Again, this is just one tool you can use. There's lots of them out there. But we know that this is important. And this is sort of another subtle piece of getting grant funding, is the connections and the network and the collaboration. So lastly, I want to talk about, once you get grant funding and kind of, acting like a good citizen and a good steward. And this is Gary King at Harvard. This is his OpenScholar site. So when you do receive grant funding, we think it's a good idea to be open about the work that you're doing with the money that you received. We see that as being transparency and showing your work as being a best practice. And the folks over at Open Science, they kind of feel the same way. We're open source software. We really are big on openness, but by putting your current research into the public realm in pre-publication format and in working papers, for example, like Gary King does here with his writings, he's got his working papers and forthcoming up there. A funder can see what you're doing and not necessarily run the risk of not being embarrassed, but just not knowing how their grants are being employed. And so a website or any place in the public realm online, unlike a report, which maybe gets put in a drawer and you can't share it or you can't see it, when you put stuff out there publicly, you're showing your work, and then a person can track the progress of your project. And we just think that's good citizenship, good stewardship when it comes to asking for grant funding and receiving it and showing your work and showing what you're doing with it. So I'm going to stop there. Those are my three kind of sort of subtle takeaways that we've seen from 23,000 researchers applying for grant funding, is tell terrific, compelling stories that stand out. And there's lots of ways to do that. Reach out, connect, collaborate, and then show your work. Be transparent, put it out there so people can see this is what they're doing with the money I gave them.
Beautiful. Jessica, thank you so much. That was a terrific presentation. Now let's turn to Jamie. You and I have had an opportunity to catch up, Jamie, and I had asked you a few questions, and I'm hoping that you'll touch on these. That's my bias in your presentation. So fundamentally, what's the most important piece of advice you'd give to a grant seeker? And secondly, what do you think is the most commonly sought after grant type? What particular type of grant would that be? And what else is top of mind for you when it comes to grant funding? I thought our conversation was really robust, and I'm so interested in hearing your presentation. So with that, let me turn to you.
Well, thank you. And thank you for Research America for hosting us today. I think one of the first questions you asked is one of the most important aspects, I think, for a junior investigator is having a good mentor, being in a good mentoring situation, having a good research project. And I think I'm going to sort of give the specifics here. Just as an opening comment, I teach a full semester course on funding and grantsmanship. All the slides in terms of open science, all the slides for the course are up on the course webpage, which you can see at the bottom of this slide, and everybody is welcome to access the slides there. So I've condensed this full semester course into 15 quick minutes just to give a quick overview and to respond to the questions that you asked. So what is sort of the pathway in terms of grants? So there are lots of mentored awards, junior investigator awards, with the hope from these junior investigators that they will advance and progress to having their own research grant, which in NIH speak is an R01. And this is an independent research grant where the investigator, the faculty member, sort of thinks about what questions they want to ask and how do they want to answer them. So there are different funding mechanisms to allow you to receive the research training and to advance to this stage. So there's the individual postdoc fellowship, let's say in NIH speak, that's an F32. There is the very powerful Career Transition Award programs, which is one of my favorite, the K99 R00. There are also the K programs, the Career Development Awards. There's a whole flavor of those, K01, K08, so forth. Even the K25, which is to bring people from quantitative backgrounds into biomedical research. But you can see the whole pathway through whatever junior investigator award program, the Ks, the Fs, is to advance the individual where they are the PI, the principal investigator of their own independent research grant. So what are sort of the 3 steps? Well, first of all, identify the funding. So identify what is the appropriate funding agency for you. Federal agency like the NIH, non-government agency like the American Heart Association. Find the appropriate funding mechanism. Is it a research training grant? Is it an independent research grant? And then when you find these funding opportunities, I strongly suggest that you create a calendar of these different programs. You don't want to miss the deadline. Some of these only have one deadline a year. You might not be at the right career stage next year. You don't want to miss a deadline. You want to plan out all of your responsibilities. And how do you find funding opportunities? Networking, speak to people in your field, at your institution. A lot of senior individuals serve on NIH review panels or advisory boards. There are lots of databases. The federal government has a database, grants.gov, and the NIH has their own database. A lot of institutions buy access to commercial databases, which are very good. Whatever you use, and the ones I've seen, the good ones, all have these email alert functions where you can put in keywords of areas of interest to you, and then you will get a targeted email alert saying, hey, a new program was just added to the database. Here's the link, and you can go directly there and find out what you need to know about that funding opportunity. Connect directly to each of these agencies. So for instance, if you're in cardiovascular research, American Heart Association is going to be an agency for you for the next 40 years. So get on their listserv, get emails from them directly, connect via social media and so forth. And then another sort of I think, underused method of finding out about funding opportunities is look at the acknowledgement section of journal articles in your field. Don't leave an oral presentation before you get to the last slide where they list all of the non-government and other little known agencies that support their research. They might be appropriate for you. So having done that, you've now decided on the funding agency, you've decided on the funding program, that you don't start writing right away. The next step is to prepare to write the grant application. I don't know too much about college football, but I like this slide. It's not the will to win, but the will to prepare to win that makes the difference. So there are things that you need to do before you sort of start that will make you more competitive as you prepare to write the grant application. Speak to people at the funding agency, speak to colleagues that were funded by this, ask to see their grant application. Make sure you understand the review processes and the review criteria at that agency. That will make a big difference. Think about what will make the application more competitive. Any special research or career development arrangements? Do you have access to all the research resources you need? How can you strengthen your preliminary data? A lot of these fellowships and K awards that I mentioned require confidential letters of reference. Who are going to write them? Okay. And other, as I said, maybe don't have a single mentor. Maybe you have a co-mentor. How can you make the research more collaborative? How can you make it more multidisciplinary? Should you bring advisors in? So here's an example table that I give to folks that are writing Fs or Ks, and it shows that you've surrounded yourself with this sort of whole team of individuals serving different roles: mentor, co-mentor, co-investigator, advisor. But you've surrounded yourself with this team of folks, all experts in their particular area, that are all going to help you with the research project and also help you advance to the next career stage. So having done that, put everything in place, now's the time to complete the grant application. So read the instructions, read them over again, take notes. I write on the side, I underline, and so forth. Never assume that the reviewers know what you mean. If it's important, say it. If it's important in more than one place in the application, say it in more than one place. Refer to the literature thoroughly and thoughtfully. You want to demonstrate to the reviewers, as a new investigator, you know exactly the current state of your field and how what you're proposing is going to advance the field. Don't bury the lead, right? You're proposing hypothesis-driven research. The rationale of your project, the hypothesis of my study is. This is what the reviewers are looking for. It'll show a lot of maturity on your part if you will recognize that there are potential speed bumps or challenges or limitations, and that you recognize them and you're sort of coming up with alternate approaches. So we don't expect to see A, B, and C, but if we do, then we plan to do X, Y, and Z. It'll show a lot of maturity on your part. Include well-designed tables and figures. Think of the reviewers reading text, pages of text. If you can represent something graphically, do it. Start with an outline. The application will read better. It'll be more pleasant to read by the reviewers. It'll flow better. Have people read the application and comment on it. And I would call these people pseudo reviewers. People sort of understand what you're talking about, but don't know what you're going to be talking about. This is not the person next to you in the lab who's heard you talk about it for the last 3 years and know exactly what you're going to say. And try to step back and see the application from a reviewer's perspective who hasn't seen any of this before. What are some common problems of applications from new investigators? It doesn't address this particular funding program. It doesn't meet the mission. It doesn't meet the specific instructions. The budget doesn't match. It's overly ambitious. It's basically too much in many different categories. What you're proposing, it costs too much money. It requires too much expertise beyond your career level. The resources don't match. The career level doesn't match. You're proposing something that should be by a junior faculty member, but you're a postdoc, right? It's just overly ambitious. It's not a good fit. The next three sort of go together. It's a fishing expedition. You're going to run a bunch of gels. You're going to look for a dot on one gel that's not on the other gel, and then figure out what the dot is. It's not hypothesis driven. Or you're just collecting data and it's too descriptive. You're not asking a mechanistic question. It's good to have preliminary data. It demonstrates the feasibility of the project, that it's going to be exciting, that it's doable, and also that you can do it, or your investigative team can do it. As a new investigator, that's important to demonstrate. There's a problem with the study design. It's unfocused, or you don't have the right control groups. It's all about diabetes, but not tied together in any thematic way. NIH is putting a lot of emphasis on rigor and reproducibility. A lot of that has to do with study design or statistical aspects of how the study was designed, data analysis, power analysis, as you decide how many subjects or how many animals are in each arm of the study. You're using some specialized cell line or some specialized piece of equipment or core facility, and you don't adequately describe it and demonstrate that you have access to it. The budget doesn't match. You're proposing too much for the little amount of money, or even the other way around. The methodologies are beyond the expertise of your team. So bring in a co-investigator that has the needed expertise. It's good to be multidisciplinary or interdisciplinary, as was just discussed, but you need to demonstrate that you have the expertise on hand to meet all of the requirements of multidisciplinary research. And this is very important, this last point here, not independent of the previous mentor's research. As a junior investigator, as you're transitioning to the next stage, you want to demonstrate that this is your research project. So I really want to highlight that last point. And finally, good luck. I know I mentioned a number of different things, but a number of different points. And I just wanted to leave as much time as possible to try to touch on those points in terms of finding funding. Once you've found the right funding program, prepare to write that grant application, and then the details of how to make that application as competitive as possible.
Wow, a second terrific presentation. I'm glad Jessica is back. So I actually have questions for each of you before we turn to our audience, if you don't mind. Jaime, and I know I'm going back to first principles, but you mentioned be careful not to, that your actual project isn't just descriptive, that it's actually a mechanistic question.
I mean, in most cases,
provide an example of what, when you see something that's descriptive rather than really asking a hypothetical, putting a hypothesis out there.
Right. So, I mean, in most cases, I'm sure there'll be, good examples of when it's not hypothesis driven, but an understanding of why something is happening. You're not just collecting data, but you're going to be able to answer the question, why are we seeing this?
Right, exactly. That makes a lot of sense. And I will say something that was a common thread for both of your presentations, and it's common in policy, probably common in any career, is the importance of concise, clear writing. Investing in a writing course if you don't feel you've gotten what you need from high school or college, and also logic, kind of basic logic, which sometimes it skirts right by me. So I mean, I know the problem, but it's very interesting to see how that is so critical just to keeping a reader reading.
Yes, and of course, science and doing research is an international endeavor, and a lot of our investigators, English is not their first language. So reach out and get help. Bring in an editor. Reach out and get help.
That's terrific. And Jessica, speaking of writing, you talked about the importance of a really strong narrative, that doesn't just get to somebody's mind, but gets to their heart, or at least somehow they can connect to it. About connecting, you mentioned that websites are, when they are compelling, they the ones that you listed, they brought a lot to the table in terms of somebody who's looking at that website would get a lot of information about the why, the what of the grants. But how do folks actually gain an audience for their website, knowing how many are out there? What's
Well,
that look like?
So to tie this back to what Jamie was just talking about, what you were just talking about with writing, for one, when you're putting something online for a website and you're writing, not only clear business writing, but with websites, people don't read them, they scan them. We know this, and we encourage people to write for a third grade level, because Jamie, just as you're saying, there are people that English is not their first language, and they'll be reading about your work. And so it's even more important on a website to be as simple and clear as you can possibly be, and to use as few words and use as many graphics and as many to use visual persuasion really as best as most you can. And so we think that that's really important. It's important to not make people struggle to understand your story, your science story, and your mission of your research and your lab site. So it's very important to have easy navigation, best practice information architecture, a very clear, concise, and abridged menu to be able to navigate your site and the work that you're doing. That helps. In terms of getting traffic, the best thing that you can do is to update your site regularly. People don't come back to static sites. They've been there once, it never changes. There's no reason to come back and visit. If you're known for someone who, everything I do, I put it out there, I put it online. I gave a presentation today, I'm going to put that on the website. I did an interview or a TED Talk or an interview on campus. I'm going to put that there. People love that stuff. If you're constantly updating news and awards, people want to hear about that. And so that people want to get behind that momentum. The site I showed you, Anna Greca, where she focuses on rare childhood diseases in her genomics research, she's actually, by constantly updating her work, she's attracted not just NSF, NIH grant funding, but wealthy philanthropists who have a real interest, a dog in the fight. They've got a child or someone they know who has a rare childhood disease, and they want to fund her. And so she's gotten funding from all these different places that are non-traditional. And Jamie, you talked about that too. Go to the endnotes and look at other funding sources. Well, they're out there, and there's a spotlight being shown on science right now. And a lot of people want to get involved and write personal checks. And if you're able to tell a really compelling story, and you're talking about, here's what we did last month, and here's our progress, you can track it. Here's what's new and interesting. And people think they're making progress, they're getting closer to something. I want to fund that. But you've got to succinctly convey it, and you've got to continuously update it. And so I would say that's the answer to getting more traffic, is updating your content, keeping it current, and conveying it clearly, succinctly, simply. And
then do you tweet out pieces? I mean, I'm just trying to figure out how folks even know your website is there initially.
Right.
Is it building a Twitter, using hashtags that common interests and that kind of thing?
Yes. And so I would say, like for Anna at the Broad, it's on the Broad site, but it's kind of buried. She has a Twitter account and she tweets out about it. She has a LinkedIn account, and she links all of her social media. And then she will, she'll, through her website, you can also link to her other social media. You can link to her Twitter and link to her LinkedIn and link to the Facebook page for her lab. So she ties that all together. Yes.
That makes so much sense.
I just wanted to highlight how important these non-government sources of funding are, whether they're a voluntary health organization like American Heart, or they're a private individual as a gift. They allow investigators to generate preliminary data, if you will, which they can then use to submit for an NIH grant. So it will make their whole grantsmanship process more competitive. It's very common for junior investigators to get funding from one of these non-government nonprofit agencies, which focus a lot of their funding on junior investigator grants or these career development grants, keep folks in the research career pathway, and then take the preliminary data that they've generated with this funding and then submit for an NIH research grant. That's a very common pathway for peer review funding.
It's a great piece of advice. Something else you said, Jamie, you said that folks should contact the agency that they're interested in, or the funding source they're interested in. So, I mean, can you pick up the phone and call an NIH program officer? I mean, do they answer?
Absolutely. Or send an email and set up a date. Absolutely.
That is just wonderful. Our tax dollars being well spent. I like it.
Absolutely. And the folks that have under their purview junior investigator type awards, the Fs and the Ks, they're very used to being called up by these individuals.
That's really wonderful and
Absolutely.
responsive. Anna, let me bring you on. I think that you are going to be asking questions from our audience. So if you wouldn't mind joining us.
Yes, absolutely. Just to remind folks, if you have a question that you would like to ask, you can please feel free to send those into the Q&A or the chat. So one question that has come in for you, Jessica, and you touched on this a little bit, but just to build it out a bit more, how does a writer or a grant applicant capture or give a complete picture of their research when it comes down to capturing those smaller details? You mentioned Anna's page, but is there such a thing as too much information? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I would say, again, I'll go back to what is sort of the core, sort of the core mission of your lab, the core goal of your team right now. What do you need funding for? And I would surface that on areas of interest, areas of investigation right now. So the stuff you've done in the past, put that in publications. You don't need funding for that right now. Talk about, that's done. Talk about really what is most important right now, what you're doing, and I would just blow that out and expand it and be really clear and succinct. And again, try and not make people struggle to understand your story on a website. And it's different when you're writing these papers and you're writing these grants. Of course, there's all this granularity, there's all this detail, but I think a website is not the place for that. A website is the place, as Ellie was saying before, to engage people, like the hearts and minds, right? It's like it's really on a more emotional level, on a visual level. Visual persuasion is we are, this is our visual, we use our visual field more than any of our other senses, right? So images that we see stick in our brain and we dream about them at night. And so you have the ability to really persuade people with excellent visual imagery. And if you tie that to the work that you're doing, and you can convey that, in a clear manner on your site, I think that it pulls people in, and then they might dig deeper for more detail.
That's great. That's great. Thank you. So Jamie, a question that has come in for you. You mentioned in your presentation showing independence of your mentor's research. Can you speak about that a little more? And if you have recommendations or best practices or things that folks should keep in mind on that point.
Right. So, the end goal is to be an independent investigator. So one should work towards that goal. And when one is applying for a fellowship, whether it's a student fellowship or a postdoc fellowship, or this K99 or 00, there needs to be a plan inside that application as to transition to the next career stage. Now, if it's a postdoc application, it's transition to independence. If it's a graduate student or a med student's fellowship, well, then you're transitioning to the postdoc or fellowship stage. But in every case, you're transitioning to a more independent stage. You're becoming a mentor yourself. You're starting new collaborations that you're bringing to the lab. So you need to, these are not static applications, if you will. I have a template table, people can see it on the webpage, of activities across the 3 years or the 5 years of the grant, demonstrating increasing independence. The didactics, the courses are sort of front-loaded at the beginning. You're going to more meetings as you progress and become more independent. You're submitting more papers for publication and so forth. So that's important that during the course of the 3-year or the 5-year junior investigator grant, you are transitioning to the next career stage and gaining all of the requisite skill sets.
Got it. Thank you very much. So a question that has come in for both of you, saying great presentations, which very much agree there. So what are your respective and most recent metrics in terms of success for first-time applicants versus second ones? Have you seen any types of numbers or trends there that you could share?
Jessica, you want to start?
I was going to say, Jamie, do you want to start?
Okay, well,
That's a hard question.
I'll jump in very quickly and say that, NIH has recognized that it's kind of tough for new investigators. And they have now have a classification for new investigators called ESI, or early stage investigators. These are for folks that are within 10 years of their PhD or the end of their residency. And there are examples to extend it and so forth, but basically 10 years. And the different institutes, so first of all, when the reviewers read your grant, they know that you're an ESI. And also a lot of the institutes have different pay lines, and this is very important, have different pay lines for established investigators and for ESIs. So that is a tremendous leg up, if you will, with the hope that the success rate for these two groups is fairly equivalent. So that's a way of one way that NIH has of sort of leveling the field, if you will.
Yeah, that's I didn't know about that. That's really interesting. We see, as I said, the collaboration piece. I know that Gary King, who said I showed you, he's a very senior faculty member in the political science department at Harvard, and he has a lot of younger grant applicants apply along with him for funding on projects he works with, and then that kind of helps to launch them, right? So yeah.
Excellent. Jessica, one of the things that is interesting about this notion of having a website is that is another advantage, if you ask me, an old lady, that young people have, is the social media savvy. To put together this public-facing medium to advance your work and to know how important it is and to leverage it. And I think the other thing is, from an advocate's perspective, the more science that we have out there, the more transparency, the more public-facing, the more you're talking with broad audiences. It serves the cause so it's a kind of a circular thing where there'll be more funding for you to apply for if folks know more about the science that you're conducting and you're open and transparent about it. So it's important.
Yeah,
it's also very important for networking, right? So other folks find out about your work. Maybe they have an idea that can advance both of your projects.
Yes.
So, it's
for collaboration.
I think folks are going to less and less conferences. The travel budgets are quite constricted. But this is a way of getting your work out there and having people find out about your work.
That's exactly right. And so putting out the work that you're doing in pre-publication, working papers, that can be contributive to someone else's project, but you'll still get credit for it. And how else are they going to find you, right? You haven't published it yet. It's not indexed on a Google search. So putting it out there and tagging it, you can tag the keywords in your research on a website, and reaching out and telling people I'm working on this, and searching on that keyword and finding them, which we've tried to encourage people to do via links. We want people who are sort of below the PI level to be able to be part of the conversation, make contributions to science early on, and so they can get folded into this discussion and then contribute, right? Because the more folks that can contribute, again, we advance along more quickly to outcomes, which we all benefit from. So we think that's really important, is to be open, put everything out there, that what you're working on right now, and find people to connect with. And maybe that might not even be, in the exact same discipline. It might be tangential, but you're working towards the same outcome, but from different angles. And as Jamie said, people aren't going to conferences. Well, when they were going to conferences, those folks might be going to different conferences or reading different journals. So how are they going to connect? So being open and transparent online is a way to do that. And you're absolutely right, Elliot. The younger folks, they are like amazingly facile in putting up their information online.
I know, I love it.
I mean, they're great. And so it all works to your advantage. So I think it's all good stuff, but we got to come at it from a number of different angles, because it is hard to get this funding. There's a lot of competition for it.
It's very
Great.
good.
Thank you. So I think we have time for one more question here. So building on the networking, piece that we've been talking about, once you perhaps have made a connection, how do you go about then approaching the topic of funding? Do you have any tips on what a person could highlight or kind of best practices to raise that topic?
Funding between the two groups, or funding or getting funding?
Or according to the question, it's if, you know, you have perhaps connected with another researcher, you know, or are trying to have a conversation with a program officer at NIH, you know, what kind of
What's
key
appropriate?
point should be, what should be
Yeah.
highlighted there?
I mean, NIH does allow for, and there are methods where there are two different groups at two different institutions can be part of the same grant. The funding will go to one institution. That institution will set up a subcontract with the second institution. This is at a very granular level. But the take-home message is that the fact is that if the two investigative teams are at two different academic institutions, that is not a deterrent for writing a grant application
That's great.
at all.
And Jamie,
Administratively, that's possible. I'm sorry.
Let me ask, just in case the meaning was, will there be a bias if you talk to a program officer with and try to get advice on an idea? So it's very preliminary. Will there be a bias against you? Is there a certain time where you should start talking about funding?
Not at all. And you know, it's important to understand the NIH sort of process. The program officer it handles grants post-award, so they can see what gets funded and so forth. They are not really, in most cases, involved with the grant submission and the grant review process. That exists someplace else.
Perfect.
So,
Separation of church and state.
Then, you know, they don't offer a score. They offer their expertise from having watched what has gotten funded, what is done well at the study sections.
Perfect. And if we didn't get your question exactly right, shoot me or Anna an email and we'll channel this question back out and with the right tone and inference to get the answer that you're looking for. Have we run out of time already? I'm so sad.
I know, yeah, we are right at time, Ellie, but I'll put both of our emails in the chat in case folks want to submit their questions.
And Jessica, you've both been so terrific.
Thank you for organizing.
Thank you.
Jessica, I feel like talking to you about starting my own website, but I have nothing to say, unfortunately. I might do it anyway, who knows? Jamie, thank you as always. You are such a resource for us. We're greatly appreciative.
Thank you.
So I want to say to you all that we have another Alliance member meeting tomorrow. We're actually taking August off. I'm sure you all are just so upset not to be on another Zoom over August. But tomorrow, Brian Southwell, PhD, and his research relates to mistrust, distrust. Now I've heard of maltrust or miscommunication, discommunication, malcommunication, and I think it all has to do with trust. And it's going to be so interesting to hear what he has to say about how that's proliferating and what to do about it. So I hope that you join us tomorrow, 11 to 11:30 a.m. Again, thank you for your membership. Shoot me an email or give me a call if you want to talk about membership and you're not a member already. And with that, we'll say goodbye and have a great afternoon.